Welcome to Recap King. In this video, we will explain Candyman. This movie tells the story of an artist who explores the macabre history of Candyman, not knowing it would unravel his sanity and unleash a terrifying wave of violence that puts him on a collision course with destiny. Will he escape from Candyman's shadow? Let's find out in Candyman. Candyman begins by showing a boy named William who is asked by his mother to wash clothes in the laundry. On the way to the laundry, William saw a police car driving around the area where he lived and asked the residents, including William, about a criminal who is currently on the run. Arriving at the laundry, he saw a large gaping hole in the hallway wall. He tried to ignore it and immediately put his dirty laundry in the washing machine. While waiting for his laundry, William returned to the hallway and found a piece of candy lying on the floor, not far from the hole in the wall. As he picked up the candy, a man with hooked hands appeared from inside a large hole in the wall. William, who was very frightened, then shouted as loudly as possible. The police, who were walking around nearby, immediately rushed to the laundry area to check on the situation. The scene then switches to the year of 2019, 27 years after the incident. A man named Troy was seen visiting his older sister, Brianna. Brianna lives with her boyfriend, Anthony McCoy, a visual artist who specializes in painting. They engage in casual chat about cheap haunted houses. Troy then tells about one of the urban legends in the haunted area of Cabrini Green, which was quite phenomenal some time ago. The urban legend is related to the dark story of a student named Helen Lyle who was doing research in Cabrini Green. At that time, Helen was photographing some graffiti on the wall when she suddenly behaved strangely and cut off a dog's head. Like a lunatic, she looked overjoyed as she lay in the puddle of the dog's blood, flapping her hands like a child. Helen was immediately thrown into prison. However, she manages to break out of prison and kills many people in her escape. Not only that, she then kidnapped a baby in Cabrini Green and disappeared with the baby after. Moments later, Helen returned to Cabrini Green while the locals were having their annual bonfire night. She takes the baby she kidnapped with her and intends to sacrifice the baby as an offering. The residents, who already know Helen's evil intentions, act quickly to save the baby. When everyone's attention was focused on the baby's safety, Helen then ran towards the bonfire and jumped into the flames, which instantly burned her alive. Although at first he didn't believe it and thought it was a mere urban legend, Anthony seemed to be interested in the legend. In fact, after Troy came home, he returned to find out about the tragic story of Helen Lyle on the internet. The next day, Anthony is in his painting studio when Clive, an art dealer, looks dissatisfied with Anthony's paintings planned to be displayed at a painting exhibition held at the art gallery where Brianna works. Clive considers his painting to be less exciting. He asked Anthony to dig deeper into his potential because actually Anthony was a talented painter. Anthony then had the idea to use Cabrini Green as a source of inspiration for his paintings. He began searching the internet for the location of Cabrini Green, specifically the church building in the article about Helen Lyle. The church building has been restored but still retains its original architecture. When he was photographing the church, suddenly his hand was stung by a bee. He then brushed his hand away and continued his journey to Cabrini Green. Arriving there, Anthony began walking through the row houses in Cabrini Green which had been neglected for years. He then entered a house and found many scribbles on the walls. He seemed a little surprised by the movement of something outside the house, but when he was about to check it out, his attention was drawn to the painting on the wall depicting a scary creature. He immediately took a picture. When he was outside the house, Anthony saw a police car patrolling the streets of Cabrini Green. Because he entered the area by jumping over the fence, he then went into hiding so as not to be caught. Anthony was then startled by a man standing not far behind him. The man is William, the boy shown at the beginning of the film. William said the police car usually patrolled at night and was rarely seen in broad daylight like now. William told Anthony that he had also lived in Cabrini Green when he was a child. Interested to know the terrible story in Cabrini Green directly from people who had lived there, Anthony then followed William, who now owns a laundry business, to get more information. William says that Helen Lyle came to Cabrini Green looking for Candyman. However, the residents of Cabrini Green know him better as Sherman. Sherman is a hook-handed man who often distributes candy to children, including William. Until one day, there was a sharp razor in a candy that hurt a little white girl. Sherman was later named a suspect and had become a fugitive. William witnessed for himself when Sherman was finally arrested by the police and beaten to death just because he was a black man, where racism was still very strong at that time. After Sherman's death, the police found more razors in the candy distributed on Halloween, and it was then that they realized that Sherman wasn't the one who put razors in the candies. But it's too late. After hearing the story about Sherman, Anthony was inspired to make an elaborate art piece which he titled Say My Name. Anthony then showed his painting to Brianna. He said that the theme of his painting was the story of Sherman, who was beaten until his face was no longer recognizable. Over time, the name Sherman began to disappear and was replaced by the nickname the Candyman. Candyman began to be seen around Cabrini Green after Sherman's death. According to legend, whoever calls Candyman's name 5 times in front of a mirror, he will appear in the mirror's reflection and kill the person who called him. Anthony then taunts his girlfriend by calling Candyman, but Brianna immediately stops him out of fear. While the two were joking, Brianna noticed the bee sting wound on Anthony's hand, but he said it was just an ordinary bee sting. A few days later, Anthony's work was finally displayed in a painting exhibition. A girl named Haley was seen taking pictures of the Candyman summoning ceremony attached to the flyer that was distributed to all art gallery visitors. Just as Haley was about to see Anthony's painting hidden in the mirror, her friend called out to her and asked her to leave. On the other hand, an art critic named Finley expressed her opinion about Anthony's painting Candyman, which she considered a cheap work of art. Brianna, who served as director of the art gallery where Anthony's paintings were displayed, then introduced Anthony to her friends. Brianna's colleagues, including Clive, frankly think Anthony's work is not so special. Disappointed that his painting continued to receive criticism and unpleasant responses from many people, Anthony immediately left, followed by Brianna, who tried to cheer him up. After the exhibition was over and making sure all the visitors had left the art gallery, Clive cleaned up before going home. With the help of his girlfriend, Jerica, Clive begins to clean up around the area where Anthony's Candyman painting is, while complaining about Brianna mixing her work affairs with her love for Anthony too much. Jerica doesn't seem too concerned about Brianna and Clive's business. Instead, she invites her boyfriend to perform the Candyman summoning ritual and attaches her belt to Clive's buckle. Clive and Jerica perform the Candyman summoning ritual as stated in the description on the brochure, but suddenly Jerica collapsed because her throat had been slit and she died instantly. Clive, panicked and frightened, immediately unhooked the buckle and tried to escape out of the building, but the door was locked and Candyman, who was invisible in the real world, had already caught Clive and dragged him away. In front of the mirror where Anthony's Candyman painting is hidden, Clive is slaughtered by the Candyman seen in the mirror's reflection. Meanwhile, in another place, Anthony, who was contemplating in front of the mirror while idly sketching a face in his drawing book, saw a bee crashing into the mirror. When he tried to catch the bee, a strange thing happened. The bee even floated into the mirror. The next day, Anthony was close to finishing another painting, although the condition of his bee-stung hand was getting worse. On the other hand, Brianna, who was about to open an art gallery that morning, found Clive and Jerica lying dead in the exhibition hall. The police immediately investigated the deaths of Clive and Jerica. One of the local television stations reported the deaths of Clive and Jerica, who were lying in front of the mirror where Anthony's Candyman painting was hidden. Anthony, who was watching the news with Brianna and Troy, seemed happy to have his name and work mentioned in the news broadcast nationally. Suddenly, Brianna felt annoyed with her boyfriend because she was still mourning her two friends' death, and Anthony was completely insensitive. Anthony then visits the library to look for more complete documents on the Helen Lyle case. After studying the files, he finally learned that the residents of Cabrini Green used to often perform a ritual. From there, he received information that Helen Lyle often admitted that she was always followed by Candyman, a scary figure who stalked her in the mirror's reflection. Anthony then boarded the elevator where all sides were mirrors that reflected his reflection. Anthony felt awkward when suddenly the elevator broke down and he found a piece of candy on the elevator floor. When he opened the candy wrapper, his finger was injured by a razor blade. He then saw the blood dripping from the elevator ceiling, and when he looked up, he was surprised by the appearance of a scary man in the mirror reflection, and instantly the elevator lights went out. Anthony tried to act casual as the elevator doors opened and then got out of there. Anthony was finishing his painting when he got a call from Finley inviting him to her apartment to talk about his painting. Anthony rushed to come there. Finley immediately expressed her desire to work with Anthony after his Candyman painting became the talk of many people after it entered the news. Anthony, who was very happy to hear this, then promised that he would return to making Candyman-themed paintings. Anthony then tells Finley that she should experience the horror feel of the Candyman painting firsthand by trying to summon Candyman 5 times in front of the mirror. Finley said she would do just that. While Finley was in the bathroom, Anthony felt excruciating pain from the stinging wound on his hand. After that, he was surprised by his own reflection in the mirror looking exactly like Candyman with a hook in his hand. Anthony then said goodbye to Finley and headed back home. While having dinner with Brianna and his friends, Anthony discovers that Finley was found murdered in her apartment. After experiencing a series of strange events and seeing Sherman's ghost apparition, Anthony went to William again. William then tells about the origins of the Candyman legend that dates back to the 1890s. At that time, a talented artist named Daniel Robitaille was assigned to paint a beautiful girl from a wealthy family. The two also fall in love with each other and have a secret love affair because Robitaille is a black man who comes from a slave family, while the girl comes from a wealthy white family. After the girl's father learned of his daughter's interracial relationship with Robitaille, the man immediately ordered his men to arrest and torture Robitaille. They cut off his hands and stuck hooks into the flesh of his arms. Not only that, they also punished Robitaille with bee stings all over his body, then burned him alive. Since then, the legend has been updated from generation to generation with the souls of other black people who had been victims of racism becoming part of Candyman's nest. The scene then switches to showing Brianna, who is very surprised by some of Anthony's paintings that he painted after Candyman's painting. The portraits look very scary with unrecognizable faces. According to William, the subject of Anthony's painting is black people who are victims of racism and transformed into Candyman. Brianna thinks that Anthony is obsessed with Candyman and tries to convince her boyfriend that Candyman is not real by trying to call Candyman in front of the mirror. But Anthony immediately prevented it by breaking all the mirrors that were there. Annoyed, Brianna left Anthony alone. The next day, Haley invites her friends to perform the ritual of summoning Candyman in the school toilet. However, after only 3 calls, one of her friends was frightened and left them. After that, a girl came hiding in one of the toilet cubicles to avoid her bullies, while Haley and her friends resumed calling. Since nothing happened, they assumed that it was just a hoax and decided to get out of the toilet. However, the toilet door suddenly locked when Haley tried to open it. One of her friends returned to the sink in front of the mirror because she had left something, but then Candyman appears and kills the girl. After that, Candyman started massacring Haley and her friends in the toilet, while the girl who was hiding in the toilet cubicle got goosebumps when she saw Haley and her friends being massacred by someone through the reflection of the mirror lying on the toilet floor. On the other hand, Anthony begins to undergo a physical transformation, which comes from a bee sting on his hand, which has now developed into a large scab that has begun to spread all over his body. Anthony went to a hospital near Cabrini Green to have his condition checked. While in the hospital, he heard the news about the massacre of Haley and her friends, which was broadcast by a local television station. The doctor who examined Anthony said that Anthony was born in Cabrini Green. Anthony even just found out about it because his mother never mentioned Cabrini Green at all. Anthony immediately went to see his mother, Anne-Marie McCoy, and demanded an explanation. Reluctantly, his mother finally reveals that Anthony is the baby who was saved from the fire the night Helen died. The mother also reveals that it was not Helen who kidnapped Anthony, and all the murders committed by Helen occurred while she was under the influence of the Candyman, who always overshadowed her steps. His mother tells him that Candyman kidnapped him and intended to sacrifice him into the fire along with Helen. However, Helen manages to save Anthony and kills Candyman by sacrificing herself into the fire. Anne-Marie never told her about it because she wanted Anthony to have a normal life and forget about Cabrini Green for good. After learning of his own past related to Helen Lyle and the Candyman, Anthony resigned himself to his fate, then retraced the Cabrini Green and entered one of the houses there. Worried about Anthony's disappearance, Brianna then goes to William's laundry in Cabrini Green to find out where her boyfriend is. But once there, she is instead kidnapped by William and held captive in an abandoned church building, where Anthony is also there in a fugue state that nearly completes Anthony's transformation into Candyman. William said he had made a false report to the police about a hook-handed killer roaming Cabrini Green. William reveals that he not only witnessed Sherman's death, but he also witnessed his spirit return as Candyman, who killed his older sister and friend after being summoned. William's ambition is to revive the legend of the Candyman as a means of revenge, not as a symbol of black suffering. William then cut off Anthony's hand and replaced it with a hook to make him the perpetrator of the murder in his false report. When William was caught off guard, Brianna managed to escape and hide in an empty house. It didn't take long for William to find Brianna. However, Brianna ventured to attack William and stabbed him in the face with a pen until he died. Anthony then appeared and collapsed in Brianna's arms. Simultaneously, the police began to arrive and shot Anthony dead on William's previous report. The police also arrested Brianna, who is considered a gang of murderers. When a police officer tries to intimidate her into agreeing that Anthony has provoked the police, causing them to shoot Anthony dead, Brianna then calls Candyman through the rearview mirror in the police car. Not long after, Candyman appeared in Anthony's appearance and massacred all the cops. When more police arrived on the scene, Anthony took on Robitaille's appearance and instructed Brianna to tell everyone. The film ends with the arrival of many police cars and the Candyman disappears.